All right, let's talk about this one. This is a really good question, and I talk often about how fatherlessness affects young men. So let's go. He says, what would be the equivalent for men? I grew up with this type of mother. It made me want to do so much better as a father. So, young men need a man to walk them into their manhood. Human beings, we both get two different sets of hormones as men and women when we cross the puberty line. When a man crosses the puberty line, he gets all this testosterone. And testosterone is a hormone that's released inside the body, and it causes our facial hair, right? And makes us get big and strong, and makes us our bones more dense, our skin more thick. It makes our voices deeper, right? But it also has a psychological effect on us too. Okay, so the psychological effects of the hormone testosterone are centered around really three different things: a desire to compete, right? Our libido, right? And aggression, right? And aggression is natural to a man, and there's nothing wrong with being a man who is capable of aggression, right? So then for women, it's very different though, right? Women, when they cross the puberty line, they get a whole host of hormones, but the two primary ones they get are estrogen and progesterone. They get it so it can maintain their reproductive organs, and it's what makes their breasts grow, right? It's what widens their hips. It makes them carry extra fat so that they can, their body can sustain a child, right? But it has some psychological effects, right? The psychological effects of estrogen and progesterone are neuroticism, which are negative self-talk, anxiety, which is like fear and worry about the moment you're in and the moment that is to come, things that are in the future. They also get emotional volatility, which is a tendency to experience emotions that move up and down, both up and down, and depression, which is like a general feeling of like negativity about your own life. And that happens when the thing that makes supposed to motivate you to do better, that thing doesn't work well, right? You look at your life and you're more negative about it than you should be. Okay. And it's actually like a diagnosable disorder where people's hormones are off because of depression. So it is a real thing. Even though I love Andrew Tate, that's something he says that is incorrect, right? But the way you fight depression is the way that he talks about it. That's one of the primary ways you talk about it. So he's wrong in how it works, but right in how to fix it. So W. Tate. All right. So for a guy, when we get all this aggression and libido, right, and a desire to compete, you need a man to walk you across that, because men will teach you restraint. And restraint is so very important for a man. So a man's aggression, when it is tempered with restraint, becomes protection for women, for children, for everybody, right? But if a man doesn't learn any restraint, then his aggression is just violence. Okay? Then a man's libido, he needs to learn restraint, or else he becomes hypersexual. If he does learn restraint, then that libido becomes like romance, right? But without restraint, he's a hypersexual man. Sleeps around this girl, that girl. His morals are constantly being compromised by his desire for sex. Competition. If a man doesn't learn restraint in how he competes and character and all of those things, then he becomes a cheat, a liar, a thief. He looks to try to gain things that are ill-gotten, right? Ill-gotten gains, right? So men teach men how to deal with the hormonal desires and drivers that are pushing male behavior. Women don't really understand that the reason men behave the way they do is because it is hormonal. Now, if you were to talk to a woman about her hormones and how they affect her mood and her emotions, well, she knows, like, hey, sometimes I'm really, really sensitive, but they don't really understand that the same thing is happening to men, except we're not getting the same emotions they do. So for the emotions that we experience as men, the things that we experience that are being driven by our hormones, women shame us for them, right? And they look at us as monsters in this current gynocracy that we live in, this society that we have that, looks at male aggression and says, oh, well, all men are violent, because there's a small percentage of hyper violent men that assault both men and women, that steal from both men and women, that SA both men and women, that DV both men and women. This small group of men out of the whole that do this, they think it's appropriate to lay that at the feet of all men. Even if you've never attacked anybody, if you've only ever protected people, they still think it's completely appropriate to do that to men. And that's part of the reason that why you have so many men who are like leaving the country, or SYSBM, Save Yourself Black Man, MGTOW, Men Go Their Own Way. They're part of these movements where they are separating themselves from Western women because they just see the mindsets of women as incredibly problematic. So in any event, when a young man has not walked across these boundaries, then, from the ages of like 13 all the way until they figure it out, they're hypersexual, hyperviolent, or they're cheats, and then some of these guys, they just come out as lazy. They're failure to launches because they never learn how to focus themselves and focus those primordial energies that are being driven by those hormones to go out into the world and take responsibility for their own success, their own life, and to go out and to become something and do something. And so these men sometimes have children that they weren't asking for, right? Or they get into relationships they shouldn't have been in because they aren't in a position to administer an actual relationship or administer a marriage. They go out and make all of these mistakes. And then if they're lucky, they find their manhood, in their late 20s or in their 30s, or some guys in their 40s. And then they begin to put their lives together, when the truth is that even though their mother nurtured them and raised and nurtured them and was able to sustain them until adulthood, or until physical maturity, the mother never could teach them how to be an adult male, right? Being a man, an adult male, is different than reaching physical maturity as a male, right? Physical maturity as a male just means that your body stopped growing. But if you haven't gone through the psychological process of becoming a man and accepting the responsibility that's intrinsic with manhood, what you owe to yourself, what you owe to other people, what you owe to society, what is it that you owe to a woman that you might be dating or that you have an interest in, or to a wife or to your kids. If you don't know what those male burdens of responsibility are, then you can't take them on. And because women are not expected by society to take them on, they never learn what they are. They might know one or two or three things. Oh, a man should be like this, a real man, and do that, right? They might know a couple of things, but they don't know or understand the masculine frame or the male burden of performance. They don't get it. They really don't get it. So when they have children, male children, these young men grow up hypersexual, hyperviolent, or dishonest men, and they go through life and they fail. And if they don't end up in a jail, or they don't end up in a grave, or they don't end up with a whole bunch of kids they don't want, or they don't end up having ruined their lives, and they were lucky enough to find good mentorship and good leadership, then they're able to grab hold of their life, turn it around, and then make something of themselves. But most young men, when they are raised with these types of women, that is their fate, right? They might get lucky, marry a woman, try to do everything the right way. They're emulating something. It was never taught to them. It's not coming from within. They don't really understand how or why to run a life, administer a household, to lead, or any of those things. They're doing the best they can because they're trying to be a good man. But nobody has ever really sat them down and said, hey, this way, not that way. They don't really know what they're doing, right? And so I find this happens often. I can talk to a man for 5 minutes and tell whether or not he was raised by his father, whether or not he had a dominant man in the home who raised him to be a dominant man and accept the burden of responsibility that is manhood, right? So, that's what happens to these young boys when they're raised with these women. They fail more often than not. And if they're lucky enough to survive the failure, then some of them turn it around, but a lot of them end up filling up the prisons, filling up the graveyards, filling up, the hospitals, filling up somebody's daughter, and not stepping into their manhood. And very few of them are able to avoid that, and even less of them are able to find their masculine frame or a mentor to help them learn that, so that they might step into the world the way that they were always meant to. That's how